Happy Sabbath, let's pray. Dear loving God, we thank you for your mercy, your kindness, your love, your watch care over us. We thank you that your hand is guiding your church at this time in its history, that you are leading a people to stand upon a platform of truth. We pray that you would help us to understand more about you, that we would understand more about ourselves, that we would be able to bend our energies to this message, to reflect your character correctly to other people. Please be with us as we navigate this history, as we walk through these prophetic events. We pray that we would understand them aright, that we would take our stand on the right side. We ask that your Holy Spirit would be our guide and our teacher now, and that you would be with us. In Jesus' name, amen. So since 1989, we recognize that we are in a warfare, although probably more accurately, we would say that we've been in warfare since we were born, or since the beginning of 6,000 years, since the sin problem. But specifically from 1989, what's the nature of the warfare? Don't answer Natalie. Don't answer Natalie, please. So, because we've already discussed something. So what's the what kind of war are we in since 1989? Information war. So we would say an information war. And where are we headed? What does the battle look like? So where is it going? And when we drew a line, we'd say we're heading towards Eden to Eden is a big line, but if we were just as Adventists, we know we read Great Controversy and we say something's what's coming. In this, what's the war gonna culminate in? Two streams. Okay, yeah, we say two streams, but where's the two streams heading? Is it just gonna go like that till the Lord comes? Okay, so we're saying we're heading for a Sunday law. That's what we would say. And so what's the nature of that information? Before the most recent times, before we changed our view of the Sunday law, what it was, or that there isn't one, what's the nature of the battle? What are we arguing about? What's the information about? Not with Sunday law, it wasn't before. So we would have said church and state. And so we would make, perhaps we would say it's a religious war over what? What's the Sabbath about? What's the crux of the issue? A day away from physical labor. Is that why we do it? Why are we arguing with people about that then? Why would we have been arguing?
Worship.
Go on, Curtis.
Worship.
Worship. So we would have said it was about worship, and I suppose it's about what God wants. We would have also said truth, perhaps. Anything else we would have said about that? So anything else we would have said, it's the nature of that test. So we would have said it's the issue of Sabbath and Sunday, and that's about worship, that's about what God wants.
The character of God.
The character of God, as reflected in the Ten Commandments.
Yeah.
Church and state. Okay, so that's the overall structure. We've learned that in recent times, information war as opposed to hot war, because I think we'd factored in there would be some kind of hot war, even though it was about the Sabbath Sunday question, which is information really. You know, which day you worship, the truth, that what information you have is what is going to determine what side you take on that. So in recent videos or in recent media broadcast articles, we're saying that the war, what's the nature of the war is defined now. Don't answer Curtis. I just asked Debbie and Bray. Yes, it's kind of hotted up in recent times. It's not a Sunday law, don't we? So what did you just say it was going to be about now? Equality. So it's equality and sexism. Specifically sexism, so it's to do with gender equality and so specifically women. And are we still saying it's church and state? It's not a Sunday law, so we're not saying it's church and state. So what kind of, it's connected to whether we say church and state now, what kind of war we say we're in. It's been more refined if we're saying this is a, you know, the latest media broadcast articles and videos. If you're not up to date, you might not know. Okay, so he's talking about the men's trinity, Darwinism, atheism. So we're going to say that that's included in it. Okay, let's put that here. So what are the three? Debbie, you just mentioned it. Atheism, libertarianism, and what's the third one? Come on, Brian, help me.
I don't know.
Atheism,
I haven't answered
libertarianism.
for this, is it the men's rights?
Yes, men's rights. And what have all those three really got, I guess, connecting link? It's all to do with gender, isn't it? It's to do with gender equality and how they see women. So all three groups, even evangelical Christians, the connection is that they accept a headship patriarchal model. They accept that women are, for various reasons. I might go into that in a bit. But this is what the kind of opposition to God's position would be saying. The atheistic or the libertarians in complete freedom, which is not equality, and then men's rights, which is not gender equality. So the way she's defining it now is a culture war. So we're saying we're in a culture war, which means that the test or the culmination of that test is going to look different from the Sunday law. We know it's to do with gender and sexism, but it's not church and state primarily now. So now we're saying it's culture and state. So in order to understand how that is going to come about into this test, we're looking at, instead of looking at the church now, the part the church is playing, we're looking at culture and the part that culture is playing to pressurize the state, or that interaction with the state, how that's going to bring about this test, this Sunday law test, and the nature of the test. And that's why we're going into a lot of these things, because we're understanding what the culture of our times is. And so we're in a culture war. And that's what I wanted to look at today, is what does that look like then? How do we get here? What is a culture war? And going back over some of the things that we've already seen on the media broadcast, a lot of the articles that have been posted, in order to understand what that is and what it looks like. So what do you understand by the term culture then? When we use the word culture, what does it mean? Debbie, you know. So let's define culture. Traditions. Beliefs. Yeah, that's good. Anybody else? Cult. What's a cult?
Social behavior.
Social behavior, yeah. So the root of culture is cult, and cult, I haven't looked at cult, but cultivate. Cult and cultivate. Cultivate is to develop or grow, isn't it? But
Customs, the same tradition.
customs, traditions, very similar, but we do use them separately. Customs. Can you hear Curtis? Can you hear Natalie?
No, I can't.
No, we didn't get the mic this week, did we? Well, speak up. You've got one as well. We'll sort that out for next week. Do you want to shout louder, Natalie? Or I can repeat it. Natalie's making the point that the culture of the movement is different from perhaps the way we describe countries' cultures, that each culture, like African culture, Jamaican culture, they have their set customs, beliefs, traditions, but it's more of an ideological warfare, how we think, which is shaped by our culture. But how we think in the movement, you think that should be different, really? Well, that should supersede or cut across. So she's saying it's not so much traditional cultures, but it's more pointed as we come to the Sunday law that people have misogyny and sexism in their culture. I think we're focusing on that part of culture. Okay, so you're probably making a distinction between traditions and customs and how they think. So there are certain traditions and customs which cultures or nations practice, but the way they think, their social behavior, I suppose that's the point that Curtis is bringing out, is that it's the ideas that there's several definitions of culture. Well, the first one you come across is the arts and other manifestations of human intellectual achievement regarded collectively. So it's arts and humanities, it's there. So we say the 20th century popular culture or the culture of the 17th century, and we talk about the art and the history and the literature that they're producing, the books there and the paintings they're painting. So that's slightly different. So that's the than the ideas, customs and social behavior of a particular people or society. So we have African culture, English culture. You know, we usually make it by nation, but it could be tribal. It could be, I don't know if there's any other, but it's basically the lifestyle, customs, traditions, or heritage of a group of people. And that then becomes the culture of the place, the way people behave, the way they think, the way they act. And when does it become a war then? What makes it a war?
It's when, I think it's when two opposing mindsets want to impose that way of thinking across society. So one group of people have a set culture and another group of people have a set culture, and each of them wants that to be the overriding culture.
One wants to dominate.
Yeah. I'm reticent to say to dominate, because they don't necessarily want to dominate. They just want, they believe that their way of thinking is better off for society.
Okay, so it's one believes their way is better.
Yeah. For everyone else. Yeah.
Okay, for everyone. So how is that culture war fought then? What are the aspects of it? What are they? How would you fight that? So if we use left wing and right wing in America, we use Republican and Democrat as an example. But let's say left wing, right wing. How is the war fought? So, so Natalie's saying we have to talk about what's included in the culture war, what we're warring about, which I suppose is where we're going, what we're warring about to determine how they fight. that. But if we primarily say, which we know, this fight is about gender equality or sexism, and that's what the fight is over. But any culture, though, how does it fight a culture war? And so Natalie's saying kills all the people against them. So it's a physical war. So she's saying it can be physical. You can have a literal hot war. So culture war, so in let's say the slavery time period in America, you've got civil war. So it ends in civil war. It does end in a hot war. How is it fought before that? What leads up to the hot war? So Natalie thinks that she's saying that we go from civil war to culture war. But I think you could argue it's, I'm sure I think she says we go the other way around. It goes from a culture war to a civil war. Well, in the 1800s, didn't it go from a culture war in a sense over slavery, and it culminates in a civil war? Now you could say it culminates, but history is cyclical, so we know that they got rid of slavery physically, but they didn't mentally get rid of racism and segregation. So we know that leading up to that, in their day, what would have been the arguments? Where would they have seen that culture war play out in the 1800s? Because you would have a farmer, you're a farmer in New York state, and you know a neighbor who disagrees with you about slavery, for instance. You're in the north even, and you've got a very abolitionistic mindset, and he's got so you just know about him. But how does that go wider than in the society? That's just two individuals. How does it become a culture, which is the whole society war? How does everybody start getting involved? Well, go back to what kind of warfare, how are we fighting this warfare now?
I think it's
so Natalie's saying they arrest people that are not slaves. So go on, Curtis.
it reminds me of the statement, the personal is political, is that personal argument between those two neighbors then influences the next person and the next person and the next person. And so it becomes a mass debate where it started off as two people having an argument. It becomes an argument that involves the whole of society. And so I had this question, actually. We say that, in 1989, we started this information war, but hasn't that always been the case, that it's been an information war from the beginning, and all wars have been, in inverted commas, an information war? Yes, you've had hot wars that, you fight, but like the Cold War, for example, it was, okay, let me not use the Cold War, World War II, physical war with guns and shooting and stuff, but really it was about one country's idea of a certain thing and another country's idea about a certain thing, about a culture, so to speak, what culture should exist beyond their borders.
Yes, so what was so if you just narrow it down, in the Second World War, yes, it was about information. And what was the information that they had to choose the sides was whether they really, let's make it really simple, whether they thought Hitler was a bad person or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I guess you can say that with Ukraine now. Let's make it more current. Is Putin a bad person or not? And is Zelensky a bad person or not, if you're going to use the leaders as the imagery? So we know on one level it's always been information war. But why then do we mark 1989? What's changed in our history? What's changed, Debray, in our history? So let's go back to Civil War before you answer that question. In the Civil War, what mechanism did they have of communication between the people in 1800s America, 19th century? What mechanism? How could you talk to someone if you were in Philadelphia, how could you talk to someone in Baltimore? So they had letters, they could send letters back and forth, but it was written communication, but it was what we'd call snail mail. And what did the public have? So you could talk to a single person that way. How could you talk to lots of people? Newspapers. So they had newspapers, they had public publications, they had books. People wrote books prolifically, history books, or even just books, but books were perhaps more limited They'd had newspapers came about. Before that, it was personal letters, like you say, and the post system. So they had ways of written communication, but perhaps less people could understand it because less people were educated, more people were illiterate. So communication was limited to a degree, but it was still there. So we had, as we say, we had those mechanism newspapers. So the Civil War's coming along to get to people, so it takes a lot longer, but it is there. And then we move to our time period now. What took off in 1989? The internet. So we make, in our history, the internet makes a difference. So the way this culture war is being fought now is, okay, personal is political, but internet, I would say, is the primary mechanism. Go on, Curtis, did you want to add?
And that's that kind of answers the question. It's not necessarily that we've now got information that we're now fighting with information that we didn't have before, but it's to an extent that it hasn't been seen in the past.
So it's greater extent of information availability and influence. So, and also in the Civil War, how did they actually overturn slavery in the end? Oh, sorry, I'm saying, so we've got, back then they had newspapers, they had books, they had written publications, but what changes the culture of the society is that who actually liberates the slaves in the end? What happens at the end of the Civil War? So Abraham Lincoln as president, so what do we call that then? How do we fight this culture war? If I believe my way is better for everyone, what am I going to do in society? I'm going to vote, I'm going to become part of the government, I'm going to want to become an MP. So it's through politics and government. So you've got politics and laws that politicians make. So government. So when we look back at the Civil War, we see that with the Civil War. So this is the state part of what we call church and state. The state has power to legislate. So it has power to change law. It has power to influence the mindset of the people by the laws it makes. And people then have to stick and to enforce the laws it makes. So, and this is the whole argument about police and rights. It's all to do with what laws we have in that culture, what were acceptable. So the question, one of the first articles that I looked at, personal is political, you're saying, so Natalie's saying personal is political equals culture. Yes, because I suppose your personal views will escalate into your political views, and that will shape the culture. Or is the culture shaped by, so is the culture shaped by the political or the personal, or both? Is it shaped by just what you believe personally? Is it shaped by what your government does? Or is it a mixture of both? Can't go beyond the political setting. What do you mean by that? So Debbie's saying you can't go beyond the political because you have to abide by what the laws are. Speak up. I don't know if it's going to make a difference if you speak up. You're not sure what you're saying? Atheism and libertarianism are... Are you struggling with whether it's the person that shapes the politics or the politics shapes the person? But you said that it's both. So do you think it's this toing and froing? I don't know whether you would say there's a dominant one, but Alderman, did you want to make a point?
I would say that
yeah, so I'm trying to repeat what they're saying, but maybe to come closer and then we can...
What was said?
I know Alderman was just making the point that I need to repeat what they're saying so that you can hear it online.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, Deb, wrestling with the concept of whether it's the people that shape the culture, the person, individual, or the politics, or both. So if we say it's the people and their viewpoint, or is it the politics, and which one makes, it's chicken and egg, which one makes culture? Go on. Okay. So slow down. So Natalie's saying the personal shapes the culture because it's the people that have the voice to say what goes on. But then someone like Trump comes along and he now starts shaping because he has a powerful voice.
When
Authoritarianism. Go on, Curtis.
when Debbie says, or is it the political, does she mean like, is it laws or is it an influential political figure? What is she defining as political?
How are you seeing political, Debbie? She's saying the laws are there for us to follow. So we can't go beyond that. We have to do what they say, really. So you're saying that kind of dictates how society behaves. I'm putting words in your mouth, but that's how society, yeah, how society dictates what people behave. Does it dictate what they think, the law? No. You think of an example?
This
Go on.
this essentially brings to the floor the debate between libertarianism and full-on left-wing, belief system, where a libertarian will tell you that individuals will slowly influence culture to be what you want it to be, to take out racism, whatever. And a full-on liberal, Democrat will tell you, no, put in laws in place, which will stop the bad things happening now, and people will change their mindset over time. And I mean, you see that with the abolition of slavery. People today will tell you, yeah, okay, having a slave isn't right, but I don't think that we would have got there as quick as if a law wasn't put in place. So the two work hand in hand. But I think that, to answer Debbie's question, my answer at least, is that laws influence the culture of society, but laws are made by people. So you can't take that out of the equation, that it takes a group of people's mindset to make those laws.
Right, so it takes a people's mindset to make those laws, but laws will shape the country's culture, people. But then if you're a democratically elected government, they would say, well, the people have elected us to make their laws. They trust us to do that, so that the laws are reflective of the people's thinking. Now, where that falls down is if you've got a dictatorship or authoritarian government where one man or a few people are making law about things that people don't agree with, or the majority don't agree with. And that's, I guess that's what we'd say the definition of dictatorship. But ultimately, the people have influence, but it depends if people abuse that power. And this is the argument that Curtis is bringing in, or this discussion between left and right wing is big and small government, is that that you need to legislate things. You don't just let things take their course. So the libertarian will say, no, society will dictate it. Eventually that will die out. Slavery will die out. We don't have to do anything. And the left wing saying, no, we need to put laws in place because that will stop it, even though people's minds might not be changed. It will stop it, their outward actions. So this is, again, it's kind of this controversy between behavior, outward behavior, and inward thinking, motivation. So I can force you to obey the law, but in your heart you're going, I don't do this, I don't agree with it, and your motivation isn't changed. But surely it's better to have outwardly people treated better, the laws in place to protect people, which is the left-wing argument, than it is just to let it all happen. And it's not going to solve itself because of the nature of human beings.
And that's what we say about the nature of man. Just stop sinning. Just stop, and your heart will change thereafter.
Make a choice. Do we?
This is the libertarian argument that we are inherently good. And it's also the atheistic argument, which is one place where they come together, that we don't need God in society. Good, we work morality out by ourselves.
Right.
The fallacy of their argument is, just a simple childish one. If we don't need an overseer to make sure we behave properly, aka God, then why do we need a police force to do the same? Why can't we all just get along with each other and not have the legal system, the police force, keeping an eye on us? Why do we need speed cameras? Human beings have been proven to be lawbreakers unless they have a stick that ensures that they don't just do what they want. We always will end up doing bad if we don't have something that's overseeing us. And
Can you
that's-
hear that, Curtis? Sorry.
Yeah, I heard that.
Okay, good.
So that's the argument about woke, about cancel culture. And I think one of the problems in our movement that we are guilty of is that we have still not let go of our own criminality. So there are plenty of people in our movement, if not publicly, but certainly privately within the realm of their personal friendships, don't mind jokes that are either sexist or racist. And people will argue that an Indian person can tell jokes about Indian people, self-deprecation, mocking themselves, and therefore it's okay for a woman to do a series of jokes about the period, or about childbirth, or about motherhood. But of course, all of that is wrong, and it's this whole argument about big government, small government, what kind of restraints human beings need to be placed upon them. And that's what's dealt with throughout the scriptures. The issue of equality and freedom or free speech. One of the things that the Americans always go on and on about is the First Amendment right, the right for free speech. But of course, what everybody seems to forget, especially Americans, is that you can speak freely, but there are consequences to pay for that free speech. It doesn't come without a cost. And what we in this movement, because we're an international movement, need to be really firm on and clear about is which laws win. If we're going to talk about laws, is it national laws or international laws, which really are human rights laws? And America is one of the countries that falls foul of this issue over and over again because they're nationalistic. They say our First Amendment rights, the ability for free speech, trumps what anybody can tell us. So the liberal Europeans or the UN can't tell us what we can or cannot say or do because we have our First Amendment rights. And we fall into that trap in this movement in so many ways. But we think our own culture, whether it's British or French or South African or Zimbabwe, we all hold on to this same problem.
So Natalie said no culture in the movement. We want God's culture in the movement. I suppose that's what we are always aiming for. So we've always, that's not a new problem that culture has been brought into religion. So we would argue this before, that we'd have, like a Ghanaian church here in England, or here in England, UK, or in Wales, but the principle of having a nationalistic or just one nation church, we'd say, where's that got a place in God's kingdom when we're all supposed to be above that culture? There's no Jew or Gentile. And yet we do these divisions, even in Christianity, which are not helpful, which are nationalistic. And I guess it's becoming, when we become Adventists, we adopt an Adventist culture, whether it's conservative, liberal, it's a certain way of thinking, a certain way of behaving, a certain way of dressing, eating, sleeping, whole life is affected by our religion. And that usually supersedes your culture of your nation. But obviously it's still mixed in there, and then you might get Indian Adventists with their traditions or African Adventists with their traditions. So there's still that level of culture in there. And one of the things Elder Tess brought out was that when Elder Jeff was brought with this test of sexism, it was a cultural test. It wasn't religious to him. So he didn't, throw out Ellen White or the Bible or argue over any of those things. He was arguing over left-wing and right-wing politics, because that was his belief system that was being that he held sacred, I suppose we could say, when we say cult, we hold on to these beliefs and behaviors and ideologies. Which is that? So now, so Nak is saying what we hold dear is not our religion, it's our ideology, it's our culture of our nation, it's things that are precious and sacred to us. And that's where Elder Jeff and many of us in the movement are falling away on this, because we don't see that distinction. We're not clearly seeing what the issue is. So I was going to ask the question next, why has the culture, so primarily the culture has gone anti-women, let's say not gone, has always been, or gender inequality. Why in our history has that become such an issue? Why are people taking that position in different groups? So we've got atheists, we've got Christians, we've got scientists, we've got libertarians, men's rights people. Why are they all, do they all have the same reason for being sexist? What are the reasons for being sexist that we can think of? I'm just going to rub off the top.
I think, like, if we recall, the Enlightenment age, where people were thinking of things differently, coming out of, the Catholic Church, where thought was suppressed, and now people are thinking more freely. There was a greater backlash, from the antagonists, from the Catholic Church. And I think we've got to a place as a society, where we followed that natural progression to where we recognize women's rights more fully than we did in the past. And once you do that, we've had, so to speak, an enlightenment on this issue. And as you do that, you'll have greater backlash from those that want to hold on to what they suppressed in the past. And so that's why we end up having this culture war along the lines of gender or sexism, because there's more free thought as to what women can and can't do. Or the argument is always made, oh, but there's no law that bars anyone. But, it's the way of thinking of what a woman can or can't do. So yeah, that's my piece.
So to summarize it, you're saying that there's an enlightenment period comes. So I suppose I think you were saying Reformation after Catholic Church, but people's eyes are open to see things through some kind of movement of society. Let's say in our time, let's say civil rights movement comes about, and that's the three groups: race, gender, or LGBTQ included in that. And that brings enlightenment, which always leads to a backlash. So people now fighting back on that ideology that's come about from that, with the laws that have been made. So to protect Black people, segregation is done away with. That now you're not allowed to be so obviously racist, but there's obviously still racism there. Now people are coming back with different arguments on that to fight that position. So it's kind of like a backlash on the civil rights movement, that people become sexist. So feminism comes about, and now we have, as a counterattack almost on that, we have men's rights movements saying this has gone too far now, this movement is getting too powerful. But so it's to do with power, perhaps we could say. Why is that such a threat? So my original question, let's go back to the original question, was why has this culture war come about now on this issue, on sexism? So why has it gone the way it has? So we've already said, I think, go on, sorry, Debbie's got a hand. So biology and science, so that's one. And what specifically about biology and science? So it's intrinsic strengths and weaknesses, which comes from an ideology. What would you say that was intrinsic? I'm going to put Darwin and then we also have his cousin Galton, his name's Galton, who developed the eugenics theory about the races, some being superior than others, which was kind of supporting slavery, but also led into the Second World War with Nazism and the whole ideology that one race is superior, which means ethnic cleansing of people. So that leads to But on a gender level, yes, intrinsic strengths and weaknesses of male and female. So they're born that way. This is why a scientist is atheistic. Sorry, it's not atheistic. This is why a scientist is sexist, but also an atheist is sexist, because they believe in evolution and not God, and there's God behind it. And the theory of evolution, or Darwin, basically said that women are an inferior species. So that's all about, they have certain weaknesses and strengths which are inbuilt, they can't change. That's the way it is. And they certainly have a lot of so-called evidence when we look around to support that. And if it isn't biology, I think Natalie said nurture. So that you've got this argument in science between nature and nurture. We would say another way of pushing that in Adventism. What's another way of pushing that in Adventism? The break. When you think of, so it's nature is how you're born, your biology, versus nurture, which is what your culture, your society brings you up to believe or see. And we would say in Adventism, what would we say? It's, when in terms of sin, we'd say you've either done this or you've done this with it. You're either born like it or you think what the words we use when we're saying that somebody sins because it's, why did they sin? It's either nature or nurture, but we don't say nature or nurture, we say it's a certain type of sin. If I give you one of the words, you'll get the other one. Nothing, can you help with sin? When we describe this battle between nature and nurture in Adventism language, what do we say? You sin because either it's this natural, but we don't say natural, we say you were the other way, born like it, you got it from your father. What do we call that? And we get it from your father or your grandfather or your grandmother. Inherited. So we say it's either nature is inherited versus, it's not even versus, it's and, isn't it really? These are the types of sin. Is it, are you that way because you were born like that, or because you have practiced it? What do we say that is? Say link to this word. Nature or nurture. So you're born like it, you've inherited it. It's inherited sin, or it's
cherished.
Not cherished. You kept on doing it, so it's become a habit now. We feel like you've cultivated sin. So it's a cultivated sin. You just kept doing it, which is similar to culture. It's been, and that's another word, another definition of culture. You've helped it to grow. Okay, so it's the biological, scientific, this debate about whether you're born like this or it's cultivated. You're either inherited like that. So women and men are a set way, and so what would we say now in the movement we believe? Do we believe any of that picture? What part of that picture of biology do we believe? Are women and men born with inherent strengths and weaknesses?
From a biological perspective, there are physical differences.
But it's that ideologies, characteristics, character.
There's physical differences.
Clearly, but that's all there is. But that's not what they're arguing here, is it? When they say intrinsic strengths and weaknesses, let's give examples. Intrinsic weakness of a female, or
what is that
intrinsic means you're born with it. It's in your nature. It's just who you are. So women are naturally more caring, soft and gentle, not so harsh. Men are naturally harsh, aggressive, because they have to defend the tribe from years ago, evolution. And that's just the way they are. That's the way it is. And you can't change it. And that's why we take the roles we take because of that. What would we argue about that? Their brains are built differently. You're more logical and Debbie's more emotional. Would you say that's correct? Any of that's correct? So we would say it's more to do with cultivation. Would we say it's all to do with cultivation, or it's more to do with cultivation? What's the percentage? Would you have a guess? Oh, sorry, can you hear online? I'm debating with Debray, and I guess I'm repeating back to them. So I'm asking, you can hear what I'm asking, and I'm pretty much saying their answers, but I'll repeat more what Debray's saying. So he's saying he's not sure, it's more cultivated. And I'm saying, what's the percentage of nature and nurture in this whole argument with male and female? So Debray's saying like one's logical and one's more emotional. Yeah. Is there any truth to the fact that they're born that way, that your brain is different from your mum's brain, from Debbie's brain, that you are more logical and she is more emotional because you're male and she's female. Would we agree with that argument? So Debray's thinking about it. Why is it a struggle? Yeah, for you. He says for me, I say yeah, for you. So he says, I'm not sure, I don't know how to answer this. Do you want to, Debbie, do you want to add anything? So with this, she said, can I ask the question again? So with this picture of biology and science, this argument that women have intrinsic strengths and weaknesses and men have intrinsic, and we gave the example that men are aggressive because they have to protect the tribe and women are gentle and soft. And I just used the example that men are more logical and women are more emotional because that's their way, their brains are wired and that's the way they're born. And I'm saying, is that true? How much of that is true?
It can't be true that there's like emotion.
So Debray says it can't be true because there are emotional men as well, so it defeats the argument. But I'm going to throw that back at you and say, what percentage do you know of emotional men compared to non-emotional men? So say you know 90% men who are not emotional, 10 that are emotional. So you're saying, he said it's definitely a high percentage of men who are not emotional because of what they've been taught to be. So you're blaming nurture for the way they are, not how they're born. So you're saying if they were trained differently, they would be emotional?
Yeah.
And somebody, I would argue as a scientist, no, they wouldn't because that's the way they are intrinsically. So is that true?
I don't know.
Curtis?
I don't know if this is factually correct. So please someone correct me if I'm wrong. But the hormones in us influence our emotions. And we recognize that men and women have different hormones. But, big but, I think that the world and past, science has exasperated that effect. So has made it bigger than it is in reality. So they'll say that women have estrogen and estrogen, heightens your emotions. And so that's why women are more emotional. That's what they would have said, or that's what they do say. And we are making the argument that, okay, yes, there's all these things that play a part in a being, but you've exaggerated the extent at which it plays a part in a being. There's also the social influence that affects a person's character. So you were asking Debray, I think, where's the scale? And I think in the past, humans have made the hormones and all the physical chemicals and all that play a bigger part than they do. And we're saying that they do play a part, but it's nurture that plays the bigger part. I can't run away from the fact that, these two things do make up a human being, but one plays a bigger part than the other, I think.
So I think if I summarize what Curtis is saying, he's saying we're born with certain chemicals, hormones, and male and female have a different balance of those hormones. Could argue that point, but in essence, there are differences with the hormonal levels, which may make someone on this emotional argument more emotional than someone else. So they have argued that in the past that women have more estrogen, therefore they are more emotional, and that's the way they are. But he's also saying the other side of that, which is this versus hormones versus that there's social influences that have categorized you in that way. So said women are emotional, we'll just put them over there in that box. And society has said women are allowed to be emotional, but men are not because they're not. And they've got to be aggressive and strong, for instance, as an example. And that social pressure, that cultivation of the culture is a stronger influence than the biological argument of the hormones. So he's saying this argument wins, but I think he's still saying there's a percentage. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know how much of a percentage, but.
So I'm going to throw in, as well, the test recommended a scientific book called what? What's she been?
Gendered Brain.
She's recommended a book called The Gendered Brain, and the basic argument of that book is what? So Debray said men are different from women, and then Debbie said men and women are the same. So the brains are no different. That's the emphasis of the book, is the brain is no different. So there is no such thing as a man being left brain and right and a woman being right brain or the other way around. That the brains essentially physiologically are the same, and that is defying the science that people believed up to that point, or that and many people still believe and are not willing to accept. Of course, a woman wrote the book, so you're right there, you're already in trouble. But in essence, we're saying that it's all down to cultivation, these differences, really, because there's no difference in the brain of a brain of a man or a woman. I know he's just mentioned hormones, which we don't fully understand all the implications of that, but physiologically, the brain is the same. So they've emphasized the differences in the past to keep women down, basically, because it suits the argument of sexism. So anyway, Elder Femina.
Both Curtis and yourself have already stated that you believe, or you give some credence to the biological argument and superior to women. You just both stated that you belief system, because you've already given credence to hormonal factors are part of the story. But we all know that the white skull structure and the black person's skull structure are different. Their facial features are different. We know that black people can work harder under the hot sun than white people can.
That's why I wanted to give a percentage.
That Western culture is superior to African culture because there's so much evidential information about that, and we've done so many tests. It's inherent in the two species between the black and the white. Even if it's to a certain degree, we all know that to be a fact, don't we?
And that's why I wanted to put a percentage on this. That's where I was going, because I don't think this is an argument that we should be discussing. So, and I know when I said percentage, I'm going to say with the book, The Gendered Brain, to finish the point, was, which I stopped and let you speak because I didn't know if it was connected to this, but we're going to say that's 100% over this side, then that's fine.
We're hormonally different, and I don't know the answer to that. You're buying into the biological argument that there is a difference. And if we're not firm on the idea, on the belief that there is no difference, no biological difference, period, because as soon as we counter that argument like, well, I don't know if there is, that means there's a possibility that there is. And that means there's a possibility that white people are superior to black people biologically, perhaps, maybe, I don't know. And if we're not prepared to say that, why are we prepared to say that there's hormonal differences? It's been biologically proved, therefore there is a difference, but I don't know what it means. If we're prepared to counter that one, countenance it, then we should be prepared to countenance the other one. There's a fundamental difference between black and white people, and everyone is scared to do that. And you're only scared to do that, not because you don't believe it. Because it's too much pressure.
And I think what I wanted to go into was that pressure and why we do that, because we can still say, I don't understand how hormones work, but it doesn't really add any weight to the argument. And that's where I was going with. The brains are no different. So ultimately, the way we think is not determined by our biology. So if we were going to put a percentage on it, we'd have to say it's 100% cultivation. It's nothing to do with how you were born. And that's what the gendered brain is saying. And that's what we're prophetically teaching, even though people are going to throw arguments like the hormones at you and say there are hormonal differences, but they cannot be used as an excuse for sexism. But I think prophetically we'd say, no, there is no difference. Whether your hormones are different or not, it makes no difference to the argument. That it's 100% nurture. It's not to do with biology at all. How character comes out, how we behave, what dictates our behavior. But one of the reasons that's difficult, that's why I was trying to get Debray to think about why is it difficult to do that, is because you look around and people's behavior buys into that argument. I was born like that. They even think like that. We say that. That's the way I was born angry, or I was born aggressive. And then we allow them to do that because of our gendered model. So we'll allow a man to say that, but we wouldn't allow a woman to say that. So, and I think that's because there's so much cultivation, it looks like that's biology, and we mix the two. And so we've got to, at the root of the argument, we've got to believe that there are no differences between the two from a biological standpoint. And that's the point Oliver is making very strongly, is that it's all about nurture. And if we don't believe that, then we go to the race arguments and say there's an element that it might be superior because the biology, the brain, whatever arguments we're going to use. But I think it's important for us to understand how we process it and argue it.
I'm genuinely open to learning, but I just want to understand the statements that have been made a bit clearer. When we say there's no biological difference between a man, are we saying that there's no biological difference that influence the way we think, or there's no biological difference, like there's no difference in our testosterone levels, there's no difference physically between a man and a woman? Are we saying that?
Are you addressing that Delta Women or everyone?
To anyone. I just want to know better.
So Natalie's asking to make it very short and just repeat what you're asking. So Curtis is asking, okay, are we just saying there's no difference between the brains, or no, the way we think, or are we saying there's actually no biological difference between a male and a female?
Both male and female have equal strength, literal physical strength.
So Debray wants to bring it back to the equal strength. So both male and female have equal strength. So Natalie says they can do, can't they? So Natalie's saying it's not like they can't be. I think you know the answer to this question, Curtis. So what would your answer be, Curtis, to someone who says that to you? I'm going to throw it back at you.
I feel like now my answer is going to get me in trouble. Well,
your answer's going to get you in trouble. Get in trouble. Go for it.
Yeah, I'll get in trouble. I at least from what I've learned, and this very well could have been learned from a sexist society, is that men and women have different physical structures. There's difference in our physicality. Where I do take the position is that, so what? That shouldn't influence the way you think, and shouldn't influence the way people treat you differently. But I mean, a woman has a vulva, a man has a penis. A woman has higher estrogen levels, a man doesn't. But at least I think that doesn't influence the way a man thinks or a woman thinks. All those differences don't influence the way the two sexes think. That's what I took from the book, at least.
So you're saying, okay, so Curtis just said basically that, yes, there are biological differences between male and female, and he gave the example of the body parts, but he also gave the example of the hormones, and then said they don't affect the way you think and feel, so they can't be brought into the argument. Would that be a good summary?
Yeah.
When you did this, you brought them into the argument, though, didn't you? Hormones.
Yeah, in that, because I was telling the story of where we've come from, believing as a society, historically, reading Gina Rippon at least, that emphasis has been placed on hormone differences, as to shaping what a male is and what a female is. And we've come to the place of being nurture supersedes all that. So we've swung to the other side. If you were to think of a balance, we've swung to the other side and say, no, nurture supersedes all those differences that we do have. And in the past, it's those things that have superseded whatever happens in society.
So you're saying in the past, we had the hormonal argument or that's one argument, that male and females are different, they've got different hormones, that's what makes them behave differently, and we categorized male and female using that. And now you're saying with the book, with what she says in the book, Gina Rippon, is that social influence has done that to people. It doesn't matter what the hormone levels are, it doesn't matter what the biology is. There's no intrinsic, difference between the two, and they majored on that argument before, and she blew that argument away.
Specifically relating to character. By character, I mean character the way we think. Yeah, those things. Because, yeah, just from what I understood, or not understood, heard being said from the floor is that there's no difference between a man and a woman physically. And I can't, I'm struggling to see how that's true.
Does anybody want to? Do you understand what he just said? So he just said, because of what was said from the floor, that there's no difference physically between a man and a woman, that he's struggling with that statement, because there are. But isn't that the whole point of what was just said? Do you want to respond to that? Yeah, because you made the statement, I think, that about this whole argument about biology. Whose statement were you referring to, Curtis?
I guess Elder Praminda and Natalie.
Both of you. Yeah.
I never said it about physical spread.
No, he said biological difference.
About biology. Same argument that you're going to make about
I can't hear him.
places.
He says he never said anything about physical strength. He said about the argument was about biology, because it's the same argument you're going to make about the races.
About biology influence on character, or just biology full stop, because I'm putting biology and strength. All the physical things that we can touch, I'm putting them in the same bucket. So I might have misunderstood what LP was saying.
She's saying biology as it influences character.
That's what Elder P is saying.
Oh, that's what you're saying. That's what you're saying. What are you saying? I think he's confused now.
Yeah, I am.
No, you're confused, or Elder Praminda's confused. Come on. Yeah, I was waiting for you to clarify what you're saying, because I think.
And what I said is not clear.
Is it not clear what he's saying? Because he's saying.
Yeah, okay.
What I said is not clear.
No, I understood it. I think what Curtis is saying is that he thinks you said that they're biologically exactly the same, which is not what you said necessarily.
Okay, then I misunderstood him. What was he saying?
Because we're using exactly.
And we're going to start talking about a man's biceps are bigger than a woman's, so therefore they're biologically different. We're using wrong methodology. You've got to have like with like. Because if you're going to start doing that, then you're going to start saying that Zulu warriors are better than Bantu warriors because they're 2 feet taller. You know, if you're going to start doing that, then we're going to go to, you'll always gravitate to the race argument, and you will always come up with the same answer that white people are superior to black people. You can't get around that argument, because all the arguments about sexism were all, I'm not going to say they were developed from that, because it's actually the other way around, but the arguments are the same about race.
Okay.
Certain races are just superior inherently. It's in their genes or in their DNA or in their hormones or in something. Not that they studied longer or harder. People believe it's inherent. So when we start talking about the inherent difference between men and women, we need to know what we're talking about.
Yes, I agree.
I'm going to say adults are superior to babies because their muscles are bigger. That's a biological fact, but it's a meaningless biological fact.
Yes.
The fact that biceps are different sizes is not what the remit of this issue is when it comes to the gendered argument. It's about the inherent differences between 2 people, a male or a female. And there aren't any inherent differences unless we're going to start arguing on different points.
I'm guessing with the complexity comes in because hormones are related to behavior, and that's different to the argument about height and size, I'm guessing that's what I'm picking up, that's where Kirsten is coming from, in the way that they've used those arguments in the past, because hormones do affect behavior to whatever, I mean, I don't understand the science particularly, but if they're going to argue that estrogen, so it seems to me that Kirsten wants to hold on to the idea that women have different hormones to men. And I'm saying it doesn't matter whether they have different hormones, and just like it doesn't matter what body parts they have, because we're buying into the argument that hormones affect behavior, therefore men are superior because the hormones make the woman more emotional, less stable, less logical, etc. But that's the argument they've used. But we're saying, no, it doesn't matter what hormones they've got. That's no justification for that argument.
I agree. Yeah. So just to clarify, that's the position that I hold. It's not that you know, one is superior because of that. It's what you said to the latter. And where I misunderstood Alpaminda is because of, he said that statement, or at least I understood, he said that statement in response to what I had said when you drew it out on the board.
So what did you understand him to be saying? That there are no differences hormonally?
When he compared and contrasted it to, you know, like different tribes, different races and whatnot, I understood that's what he was saying at first, but I've clarified that, at least I understand what he's saying now, is that all those differences make no difference in the right argument that we are making, the intrinsic argument. So all those physical differences don't change what we are saying about the way the two sexes think and behave. Yes? Is that what he's saying?
Yeah. Yes, he's asking you, he said, is that what you're saying? Is that what he's saying?
I didn't hear everything that you said, so I'll just say yes. They've done really good research about, you know, human beings. You can take someone, an indigenous person from the Amazon, and if you left them in their environment, they would be what we might call ignorant, as we understand it, you know, in Western terms. They wouldn't understand philosophy. They could not appreciate classical music. And if you got those two people and put them together, you know, someone from the West and someone from the Amazon, you would see that they are fundamentally different. And that was an argument that people used to say that they are different races or different species. I'm just going to call it black and white. But we all know, especially in the 21st century, if you take someone from the Amazon, a baby, and put them into a Western environment, they will become, if I can call it this way, westernized. They will have all the ability, all the arguments, all the sophistication of someone who lives in the Netherlands. And they will look, not physically, but the way they behave, they will be like European. They won't even be able to associate with their past, with their family history. And so, you know, there are so many sophisticated experiments that have been done to demonstrate that innately human beings are all equal. And so when we start talking about differences between men and women, and people start targeting hormones as one example, what they fail to realize is that they've been suckered into bad science. That women aren't gentle because of their hormones, they're gentle because they've got whatever the 1,000 years you're going to say, I'm going to say 4,000 years of cultivation, and it gets imprinted upon them in the womb. After everything around them turns them into what they are. And because it's so subtle, we don't understand the mechanism of that. We just say, let's be time with the month, let's be PMS, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Let's be hysterical, so you give an operation. And so what seems to be biological differences are just not biological differences, both in the races and in the gender. It's really, really bad science.
Yeah. I get that, and I get what he's saying. And I think another example of that is just what he brought up in General Pon's book. In one of the chapters, she talks about PMSing, and if you look at two cultures and how they behave when they're on their period, their behaviors aren't the same, they're different. So it can't be a cause of that hormone. It has to be culturally influenced, at least, because you would expect the same behavior, but they aren't. And yeah.
Okay, so I think this is a very important point, because it hits at the root of the way we see male and female. And if we fully don't take that position, that it's 100% cultivated, that makes somebody behave like they do or think like they do, then we're going to buy into these biological arguments. So that the hormones, for instance, we're going to say because they've got more estrogen, therefore a woman behaves like this, that way, and a man does this way. And so that's why the gendered brain is really important, to really understand that they are the same brain. It's the same. Yeah, that's gone.
Without talking about the situation of who it was, I was in a conversation recently, and the man speaking about the woman said, of course she can do it because she can multitask. And everyone knows that women can multitask and men can't. Everyone knows that, it's a fact. And the man who said that is high up in the organizational management structure. And I pointed out to the man, I said, simply speaking, aren't you an expert in project management? You get paid high figures to do that. And he stopped in his tracks and he said, oh yes. Because if you know anything about project management, it's the art of multitasking. And so he speaks about the woman, you know, she's a mother or whatever, she can multitask because that's who she is. But he gets paid a huge salary to do exactly the same thing, and he's a supposed expert on it. And I'm not arguing that he's the reason, but he didn't see it that way. He sees project management as, you know, a job that men are good at, and multitasking is sort of a cheapened version of that, because women can cook and clean and take care of children, and they just call that, oh, that's a poor person version of project management. We'll just call it multitasking, because that's what women do, and they're second-rate citizens. And when we do it, it's called project management. It's super art, and you need a degree in it. And he to that point, he couldn't connect the two. It's not a gendered issue. It's just that someone gets paid for it, they get a degree, and they call it project management. And an uneducated woman who has nothing is called a multitasking.
And as Natalie says, a married woman is a project manager, and that's how some people are marketing it now. Yeah. And that hits, I think that's part of the root of the problem, is that because they look around and everyone is fitting into that model, practically to a man, to a woman, to a human. So there's nothing to stimulate that change. I think this is where it becomes it feels like a spiritual battle, that we have to look through God's eyes and not through what we see, which is what we know as Christians, because the majority of people are lost and not interested. And the majority of people on this issue are lost and not interested because they're in a sea of culture which has cultivated sexism and gender inequality. And that's why we at every step have to check our thoughts and feelings on why are we saying what we're saying, joking about what we're joking about, thinking the way we think about it, allowing other people to talk like that or think like that, because it's a constant battle to go against your culture. Because it has, even though it's 100% cultivated, you were raised in this culture for 60 years, 32 years, however many years old you are, you've been immersed and steeped and boiled in it, and then you've become Adventist, and that's compounded the problem of sexism. So when we were asking what are the reasons people are sexist, so we know it's with the non-religious people, the scientists, it's biology, With the Christians, it's headship and patriarchy. And then with the atheists, and I mean, atheists, you can say it's biology and Darwinism as well, but libertarians who believe in the freedom, why are they sexist? What's at the root of sexism for a lot of people? If we look back as well at 1888 and the 1860s, what was the reason why people were so wanting a Sunday law, or wanting to keep their slaves, not wanting to let go of racism? What's the root of that? Gain, so debate is gain, supremacy, yeah, so it is power. Supremacy, what's at the root of supremacy? What was the problem in 1888? What's the movement? What's driving people to say we don't want immigrants, we don't want Seventh-day Adventists, we don't want Jews? So it's what you say, it's white supremacy. It's not always white, but it is supremacy and power. Obviously, with this argument, it's male and female, but fear, yeah, fear is driving people to say, if I let you do that, I'm going to give away my power. You're going to take my position. You're going to take my power. So they're afraid of. So at the root of that is ultimately the male and female. Men are afraid to lose that power to women because their position is threatened. So the immigrants were the threat. Women, Muslims, Mexicans, LGBTQ, all of them threaten male dominance and power. And we could say white male, dominance, because there's obviously, we talk about intersectionality, which is different levels of prejudice, whether you're female, LGBTQ, white, black, Indian, different cultures have different pecking orders, even the class system, the whole thing. But it's all about, it seems, fear, and perfect love will cast out fear. So if we're truly Christ-like, God wants to give us that love that's going to be, is not going to operate on the same principles that the world operates on, which is we're going to legislate now. So I was going to go into this connection between law, politics, and government, the state, and the culture. So we had up here that now we're in a war between state and, well, a culture war, sorry, but this whole argument is about church and state, and now it's about state and culture. So how is culture, because before we'd have said the church is going to come together with the state and influence the state negatively. And now I think we can use the same logic that the culture is coming together with the state to influence the state negatively. And the point that Elder Tess is bringing out, one of the points, is that the government only does what the people want. So the power is not with the government, because we used to think the state's the threat, the government's the threat, it's going to pass a Sunday law. And that was our whole concept of it. But she's shifting the concept to the wider picture, which is that the people make the government do things. It's the people that move the society. And now with the internet, I think it's given the people a greater voice, a greater power position, a power base to influence others over what the government says even. So that, and obviously we know the government's made up of people, so it's personal, it's political. But one of the, yes. So where has that culture come from? And a lot of it has, it's exploded because of the internet. Because now those sort of people that think in a certain way can talk to others who think like them, and then they can come together and they have more power. The more people there are, the more power there is.
I have a question, Emma.
Yes, go on.
Oh man, no, it's gone. I think my question was, so we talk about, cultivated tendencies, behavior, etc. And Elder Parminder gave the example of the man who is the project manager and points out a multitasking woman. Do both these instances occur, or is it one or the other? Where are we blind to things that men do, but we label them as women traits, or have they just been 100% cultivated where they don't exist between, well, not don't exist, but on a mass scale, don't exist between the two genders? So the example I'll give is, nurturing, caring, caregiving. Have men been nurtured? Have women been nurtured to be caring and loving, or are men and women both caring and loving, but we are just blind to see the caring and nurturing thing that men do show in society? I don't know if my question makes sense. It's just using the base of the example Elder P gave of, the man saying, but you are multitasking. you know, and men typically don't say that they're multitaskers, but they are. Does my question make sense?
So is your question, I'm not sure your question does make sense. I don't know if your question is that the way men and women are, and that they all are caring? So let's defy that argument. It's not just women are caring, men are not caring. So they're all caring, but we're blind to it because we've been cultivated to see it that way. Or is it that they're not that way? You know it isn't. The other answer, it seems to me you're asking, or is it the fact that women are caring and men aren't? You're definitely not asking that.
Yeah, I'm not asking that.
So what is the question? The question is, are we blind to see it? What's the question?
So there's two situations, right? Situation one is that how can I put it? So we say that these two behaviors are cultivated from birth. So men end up behaving a certain way and women end up behaving a certain way because they've been cultivated that way, right?
Let's say caring. Let's use that as an example to make it more
caring.
So, raised to be caring and men are not.
By giving them, you know, from the toys that they play with, etc. And so that's one situation. Because okay, I'll say the because afterwards. And situation two is that despite all that, they are both caring, but as a society, we're blind to men being caring, that they act as adults, they do exist as carers, as loving and emotional, but we're just blind to it. And the example of that is the project management or multitasking. Men are multitaskers as women are multitaskers, but we don't see it that way. Instead, we're blind. We don't call it multitasking, and then we call it a gendered trait.
Go on. So Paminda wants to answer that question.
Human beings are inherently good, whatever their gender is. Human beings are inherently selfish, whatever their gender is. When you start taking our utter selfishness and our utter or inherent goodness, and you start imprinting societal expectation on top of that, you begin to see changes. You begin to see people being molded. And what tends to happen, what has happened, is the selfishness and the goodness, which is, we'll say 50-50, every human being innately tends to get molded and shifted by society in a gendered way. In another time, it was skewed with different metrics, color, for example. But the gendered one's been all the way through. So men are expected, I think if you're trying to be 22, to be warriors.
Yeah.
And women are not supposed to be warriors. When the Titanic sinks, who goes first into the lifeboats and who has to stay behind? So there's these societal things that are put upon people that begins to warp not only people's perspectives of gender, but our own, and it becomes so innately built into us that we believe that it's a biological fact that men are from Mars and women are from Venus, that they operate differently, but they don't. So we get to a place after 6,000 years of sin that what it appears to be is that women are gentle, peaceful, and men are aggressive, or we might say selfish. And those abilities that they have are not even just come to, we're not born with them per se, but we actually want to fulfill them in our own lives to fit into societal mode. So an aggressive woman just gets beaten up through her life in various ways, that she'll end up wanting to fit into the cultural norm on average, and so it is with the men. So if a boy cries on the playground when they're 9, they'll either be called some derogatory term or a sissy. they'll say you're gay, or
Just a
they'll say
derogatory
something
term.
about them because boys aren't allowed to cry. We all know that. And so by the time you get to 18, you don't see boys crying. And it's the same with girls. If a girl becomes too stroppy or too argumentative, they just get hammered into that. And the thing is, you don't see many cases of it because by the time a girl comes with consciousness, 7, 8, 9, it's already too late. All the damage was done years ago to her. So it's not that there are differences that when you talk about goodness, but it's the other way. Women are just as selfish as men are. They're just as selfish. They're just not allowed to be as selfish. We'll discuss that when it comes to sex. It's not that women are frigid or they don't like sex. They're not allowed to say, you know, I enjoy sex more than you do. They're not allowed to speak that way. It's part of sex-based feminism, sexual revolution. They're allowed to say, I enjoy sex, I enjoy pornography, or whatever it is. They have the freedom to do that, and it shocked people.
I get that. What brought that to mind was when you said people on the other side that do argue that there are these differences, and then they get arguments back and they say, well, look at society, just look around you, people do behave differently along, you know, the sexes. And my question was that really, not that there are differences, but are people just blind to see that actually they behave the same, or have the two been molded into these beings because of, you know, how they're treated as children? I guess.
I think it's a bit of both, don't you?
I do think it's a bit of both.
One of the things that makes people think certain ways is you have two different languages for the character traits. So if it's something that's good, positive, gentleness, when it's a woman, they'll say, oh, what a virtuous woman. When a man does that, it's like, what's wrong with him? He's a sissy.
Suspect.
So they use gender terms to make things look positive or negative. So if it's a man who is, you know, defends their rights or has some aggression, they would call it honourable or it's manly. And if it's a woman, they'll use I don't know how many letters it is, but it begins with B, it's about, you know, animal. They'll call her that, and they're expressing very similar character traits. And so the way you force people into submission or lift them up is we're just using gendered terms. So it's not just about is God male or female? Do we say him or her? They use swear words to do this.
Just hold on, you can't hear him.
You can repeat, and it's really effective.
Yeah. So what Elder Pimmon is saying is that people use gendered terms depending on who's displaying that trait. So can you hear me? Can you hear me, Curtis? I can't hear anyone. Why can't he hear anyone? I can see him. The Zoom is still here. He can't hear. Have you pressed something on your computer, maybe? Nothing's changed. It's saying it's still internet. I can see the video moving this end. It's not jammed. Maybe you've got muted or you've lost connection. Cedri's there. Can you hear me, Cedri? I don't know if she's listening. Oh, Curtis has disappeared. I'm not sure because nothing changed on here. Cedri had just joined not too long ago. I don't know if she can hear or not. She's on.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? It's just that Elder Paminda sounds like he's shouting, so there's an echo, I think, and I can't actually hear properly.
Oh, but you couldn't hear him properly, but he's shouting, so that's good because no one else can hear.
I can hear the shouting here, but you can't hear the words being formed because it sounds like there's space and echo or something.
Okay, so Curtis, can you hear me now? He's raising his voice. I can now. And could you could hear him a bit before, couldn't you?
I could, and then everything just cut out. So I think it was something on my end where I just couldn't hear anyone.
So could you hear him even though he's raised his voice? You could still hear it clearly.
Yeah, I could hear him.
Okay, so maybe it's CJ's internet, but I'll just repeat what he said was basically people use, well, he could repeat it really, negative or positive ways of speaking. So there's a different language when we describe the traits in male or female. So when you describe a woman being gentle, it's positive, isn't she? Virtuous woman. When you describe a man who's gentle, you say, what's wrong with him? That's a bit weird. Or he's, you know, what school children will say, sissy, gay, which are all gendered negative terms. So they put women down, they put LGBTQ people down. So it's all buying into toxic masculinity when they do that. But it's the whole way we view those characteristics in male and female. So going back to your question, which was, you know, are these things actually equal? And people just don't see it. I think I didn't really see the question because I thought, well, that's the state of affairs, is that yes, they are equal, but because it's been cultivated out of people or into people, it seems like when you look around that they've got supporting evidence for the fact that men are this way and women are this way. And this is the problem we're facing if we look with our eyes around us. But I think I was trying to relate that to something we'd be familiar with, which is the creation argument. There are animals around which you could say that looks like people use to support evolution. We've got plenty to support creation, but no matter what someone said to us about that, we would still say, no, there's a creator God, and I don't believe evolution. And they say, come on, look at it. This thing's evolved to adapt to its environment or whatever. This is evolution. This is supporting evidence for evolution, but we would never countenance it because at the root of that, we believe, no, there's a creator and there's no such thing as evolution. And I think that's what we've got to be that firm on this. No, they are equal from the get-go, male and female. There is no difference to excuse any kind of gender inequality. They said there's no difference between a male and a female brain. There's no difference between, you know, a male and a female intrinsically, so that they behave like that. It's all cultivated. And because it's been cultivated to such an extent, it's even possible, I don't know that that's changed the genetic, you know, I don't know if you want to go that far. What were you going to say, Debray?
This is a separate question then. Based on everything you just brought out, should women's sport and men's sport be kept separate?
So now Debray's going to open a can of worms. Sorry. Debray's asked the question, so should men and women's sport be kept separate or not? Now that's a whole debate in itself. I'm aware that it's 12:10. We didn't get anywhere near where I wanted to get to. So next time we'll pick up this thread, which is looking at how these cultural arguments, yes, maybe Vespers, I know tonight we're probably having Vespers if people are on board for that, how these cultural arguments are being framed in our society to do with how people interact with each other. And basically went back through the media broadcast articles, picking up the word culture and seeing how people are arguing in our current day culture, these viewpoints, you know, how, which is what we started to touch on. Why are they sexist? What's the root of that? And how are they arguing those arguments? And these are how are they arguing the war? What's, you know, the opposition? What are they actually saying to make it plausible? And if we buy into any of those arguments, we're going to slip. You know, if we start saying, oh, you're right, I don't know how to answer that, you know, like the hormones. Well, oh yeah, it does seem when I look around that hormones do affect a woman's behavior and therefore X, Y, Z, you know, and it really helps to keep bringing it back to race, which is what Albert Women did there, was if you start to apply those arguments to race, you would never countenance it. You can't say, well, just because your brain is bigger or your skull's bigger, that it makes a white superior to a black. You know, you would never use that argument and buy into it, but we do it for male and female. And I think we have to consciously check ourselves because we're all damaged from our culture and cultivating those traits. So thank you very much for your participation. So Curtis says, just to clarify, my question wasn't if there are actually inherent differences. No, I know it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't whether there are actually inherent differences. It was how people perceive those that subject, whether they perceive it as. I think most people do perceive it as inherent difference, but whether they're just blind to the fact that people are like that, or actually, I don't know what your question was. That's what I'm saying, because either they're blind to it or not. I think they're just blind to it, aren't they? Because of the way they've been raised. All of us are, and that's why we're having our eyes opened in this whole dialogue. If you want to come back on me, we'll pick it up later. All right, so let's close. And this is something we need to be on the watch for every time we read anything, every time we interact with people. Am I coming from a sexist angle? And most of the time, without realizing it, we slip back into that position without even recognizing that, because we're products of our culture and it's everywhere in everyone. So it's a huge issue. Let's pray. Thank you. Dear loving God, we thank you for this study. We thank you for using Elder Tess, Elder Paminda, and the to open our eyes to this discussion, to this subject, that to open our eyes even to gender inequality and sexism, to see the test that we are in and part of every day, that every thought we have, every word we speak, everything we do reflects whether we really believe in equality or not. And we pray that you would help us to have our eyes open, to be diligent, to be watchful, because we know that every moment is fraught with eternal consequences. As we make decisions, as we interact, we are reflecting you to people, and we want to give a right testimony. We pray that you would be with us, guide us, and bless us. Keep us safe until we meet again, and bless the rest of our Sabbath day. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Emma, please could you, when you have the link to the recording, post it on the forum, because